Welcome to the Traveling Flaneur podcast, where I'll talk about the economy, politics, history, and culture of the places I've visited. I'll also give you travel tips, recommend places to visit, things to do, and the best food. The life of a flaneur is that of an observer, a person who wanders aimlessly with eyes always open to any opportunity. It is a person who is in no hurry and prefers the journey over the destination. I believe that in this hurried world we live in, we need more flaneurs, and I hope you enjoy the perspective from a traveling flaneur and maybe become one in your next trip.
Hi, and welcome to Buenos Aires. This city is known as the Paris of South America and is the Argentinian capital, and it's also the favorite city for many travelers because it's going to blend many things. It will have European architecture, a passion for soccer, tango, cafes, but also lots of art and gastronomy. So it's going to be one of my favorite destinations in all of Latin America because this is going to be a place where you can explore many colorful neighborhoods. You're going to also have lots of history, impressive museums, and you can also just sit in a cafe to read or walk around like a true flaneur. Another incredible thing about Buenos Aires is going to be their very distinctive culture because porteños, as inhabitants of the city are going to be called, are going to have a very particular personality. They are going to be extremely passionate, they're going to be direct, they are kind of night owls, and they are going to be very proud of the city they live in. And the truth is, they have many reasons to be proud of the city. But since this city is going to be so large and there are going to be so many things to do, I'm going to dedicate several episodes to exploring it. But before this, I'm going to tell you some interesting fun facts about this city so you can see how interesting it is going to be. And the first is that Buenos Aires is going to be the city with the highest amount of bookstores per capita in the world because porteños are going to be fanatic readers, and this is going to mean that in every corner you're going to find a small bookstore or places where you can trade used books. The second thing about the city is that it's going to be the third city worldwide with the largest theater offering, demonstrating all of the importance they're going to give to their arts and their cultural events. The second thing about the city is that and the third cool thing is that Buenos Aires name doesn't actually come from the air of the city because Buenos Aires would translate to good airs, but this is the name of a protective virgin of navigators that was called Santa Maria de los Buenos Aires. And all of the Spaniards that were coming here were doing all of these long navigations, and so when they saw this port, they named the city Buenos Aires when they first arrived in 1536. But so this is going to open the door for the last particular thing that I have to mention about this city, and it's that it's going to have two founding dates. The first time was in 1536, as I was mentioning, by Pedro de Mendoza, but when he first founded the city, the natives, of course, weren't very happy with the arrival of the Spaniards, and they had some couple of clashes. The colonizers had to abandon the settlement. And so the second time that they came, they were a bit more prepared, and they founded the city in 1580 by Juan de Garay, but this time it was the successful founding of Buenos Aires. During colonial times, though, the funny thing is that Buenos Aires wasn't a very important city because the Spaniards were way more interested in other parts of the Americas where they would find gold and silver, like Colombia, Peru, or Mexico. But everything changed in the 19th century because in 1816, Argentina officially declared its independence from Spain, and Buenos Aires started getting transformed between the late 1800s and early 1900s because during those decades, Argentina became one of the richest nations in the entire world thanks to all of the agricultural exports. Basically, the Argentine Pampa was producing enormous amounts of wheat and beef that were then shipped into Europe, and all of this money from agriculture then would flow back into Buenos Aires, not into the Pampa. But all of these local rich people who were extremely wealthy at the time wanted their city to look a little bit more like Paris. And so they hired all of the European architects, imported construction materials, and completely reinvented the city. That's why when you're walking through Buenos Aires, you're going to find all of these buildings that will look like Paris or Madrid, and you're going to also find some avenues that are inspired by the Champs-Élysées or palaces that are going to resemble all of the French chateaus and all of these European-style theaters. This golden age left an unforgettable mark on the city's architecture, and all of this heritage is going to still be visible in the city. But the cool thing is you're also going to find a lot of contrast in Buenos Aires because you're also going to find neighborhoods like La Boca, where it's going to be the complete opposite, just colors, lots of small, maybe like slum places, but now they're becoming a lot more touristy thanks to soccer or tango. So, exploring the city's neighborhoods is going to be essential. And my recommendation is that if you visit Buenos Aires, you should stay at least 4 days over here, and you're going to explore all of its different neighborhoods throughout this 4 days. One day you should dedicate it to exploring all of the European neighborhoods that are Recoleta and Retiro. Another day you should dedicate it to explore the old part of the city, which is going to be the city center or San Telmo. Then another day, you should explore the more modern part of the city, which is going to be Palermo. And the last day, you should visit La Boca and Puerto Madero, which are going to be the two opposites of Buenos Aires. If you have even more days, of course, you could use them for going to theater, maybe even crossing Rio de la Plata to visit Uruguay, which is going to be right next to Buenos Aires. But over this episodes, I'm going to talk about all of the things that you're going to be able to do in Buenos Aires, as well as the local experiences that you might have, including tango or mate or asados or many different things that local porteños are going to be extremely proud of. But before we go into all of this, I'm going to cover some of the basic things that many travelers want to know before they visit Buenos Aires. And the first one is, how expensive is it to visit Buenos Aires? And well, this is going to depend a lot on what you consider expensive. When I first went, I thought that it was quite expensive, but because I was comparing it to usual Latin American cities. And for example, in Buenos Aires, when you want to eat at a good restaurant, it might cost between 25,000 and 40,000 pesos per person, which is going to be from 20 to 30 US dollars. But if you want to go to a luxurious dinner, this is going to be, of course, even over $100 per person. When you want a good steak, which is going to be one of the best things in Buenos Aires, it will cost around 25 to 30 US dollars. But so, in my opinion, personally, comparing it to Colombia or the rest of Latin America, this is going to be expensive. But when you're comparing it to the US or Europe and you have the standards, then obviously it's going to be cheap for you. So again, it depends. It's going to be more expensive than most Latin American countries, but it's not going to be more expensive than Europe or the US. The second question that I get asked a lot is, how do you get around the city? Because, of course, as you've heard, this is going to be a huge city, but the good thing is that it's very easy to get around. They're going to have their transportation system, which will consist of their subway, or how they call it, subte. And even though this one won't get you everywhere, it's going to be cheap, convenient, and fast. And then you can combine it with the buses that will connect you to way more areas. And again, it's going to be part of their public transportation, which is easy to use. If you don't want to use this, also we're going to have just Uber and taxi, and they're going to be relatively cheap as well. So personally, I think that either of these two options is good, but I would recommend getting to one of those neighborhoods either by subte or Uber, but then exploring by walking. Because Buenos Aires is going to be one of those perfect cities where you can walk around, explore like a flaneur, and get to know the city better on foot. Final question is, where should you stay? Well, there are many different areas. As you can see, my favorite one is going to be Palermo because this is going to be the most modern area. It's going to have a lot of restaurants and nightlife. So it's, of course, the favorite option for most of the travelers. If you want something that's going to be relatively more central and like hostel style, then maybe you should opt for San Telmo. But if you prefer something a little bit more elegant or more luxurious, then you could stay in Recoleta or Puerto Madero. When I stayed in Palermo. I chose an Airbnb. And again, I didn't find it super cheap compared to the rest of Latin America. But the good thing with Airbnb is that you can compare a lot of options and then you can decide which one you'll stay in that same neighborhood. So I found that this was my best way of finding where to stay. Now that you know all of these basics, I'm going to begin our tour visiting the first neighborhood that I would recommend visiting, and it's going to be Recoleta, which is the European part of the city, or how some people would call it, the rich neighborhood. In the early 20th century, as I was explaining, all of this Argentine elite started building all of their places in the area because they wanted to create the city that was going to be a copy of Paris. And that's why when you're going to be walking around Recoleta, you're going to feel like you're in Paris. And this is not only going to be the architecture, because this aristocracy wanted to copy literally everything in Paris. So you're going to find, for example, cafes, little alleyways, bookshops, or big avenues that are going to make it look like everything just turned into Paris. And the history of Recoleta is going to go back to the period of enormous economic prosperity between 1880 and 1930s, when Argentina was the sixth world power. Back then, all of this elite decided to transform Buenos Aires into a European city. And again, as I was telling you, they were hiring these French architects. They were importing all of these materials from Europe. They basically built things just like Paris. But the funny thing is that they also started even speaking French among themselves. Because the better French you were speaking, the more times you had supposedly spent in Paris, and therefore the wealthier you were. And so, in fact, people used to say that all of this aristocracy was more French than the French themselves. But before I tell you about the specific places that you should visit, I'll tell you about why this neighborhood is called Recoleta. Because the name is going to come from a religious order that existed, and they were called the Recoletos. They settled here in the 18th century, and they built a convent and a church, which you can still visit today. It's called the Basílica Nuestra Señora del Pilar. And this church was built specifically in 1732. It's one of the oldest in Buenos Aires, and it has a beautiful colonial style that will contrast with all of the French architecture around it. But by the time all of these wealthy people started earning money, they decided to kind of take some power of the church and put it into money. So they took away all of this monastery of Recoletos, and they decided to, again, remodel everything into this French style like city in this area. And that's why this neighborhood is called Recoleta. And top place that you should visit in this neighborhood is going to be the Recoleta Cemetery. And I know what you may be thinking. Are you recommending visiting a cemetery? But yes, and with a great reason, because this is going to be one of the most beautiful cemeteries in the entire world. It was originally inaugurated in 1822 as the city's first public cemetery, but all of this porteño elite started just buying a lot of land and constructing a lot of monumental things over there, so it didn't become a little bit of public. It became more of a private thing, and not only private, but like a rich people cemetery, because they started constructing all of these different things in the cemetery, again, inspired in Paris, most specifically in the Père Lachaise Cemetery in Paris. And so this incredible cemetery became like a miniature city. It has streets, it has squares, it has avenues, and it has over 4,600 vaults and mausoleums that you can visit. But they're not going to be just normal tombs. Over here, you'll find literal works of art. You will have mausoleums that will have neoclassical style, Art Nouveau, Art Deco, Neo-Gothic styles, literally everything. And they're going to be built with marble or bronze or some of these best materials that could be imported from Europe. And you might also be wondering who is buried here. Well, all of the Argentine elite. We're going to have 29 presidents, one Nobel laureate, famous writers like Adolfo Bioy Cáceres, and generals like Juan Lavelle, and also aristocratic families with surnames that are still going to be important business owners today. This cemetery is going to be one of the top places that you should visit in Buenos Aires, but to make you even more eager to visit, I'm going to drop a small fragment of my guide that was talking about the most visited tomb in this entire cemetery, and I'm going to be adding subtitles so you can follow along while my guide is explaining.
Evita es el más famoso. Muere en 1952, muere de cáncer, su funeral dura 16 días. ¿Cómo se mantiene un cuerpo por 16 días? Eso es imposible. No es imposible si le van inyectando líquidos constantemente a lo largo de todos esos días. Porque la imagen que se tenía de ella era que su cuerpo no se podía pudrir. Nunca. Contrataron a un anatomista para que le sacara todos los líquidos que tiene el cuerpo humano, se los reemplazara por un líquido particular, con la intención de que el cuerpo quedara como el cuerpo de Lenny. No sé si lo ubican. Digo Lenny porque es un ejemplo puntual, pero líderes mundiales en el mundo hay montones. Que se quede intacto, que los pudra. En 1952 muere. En 1955 se roban el cuerpo. En 1957 lo mandan a Italia. Es sepultada en el cementerio público de Milán con el nombre falso de María Masi de Masistas. Se lo robó porque había un golpe de Estado en Argentina, porque se había prohibido el peronismo y porque se quería borrar la historia de Eva. La mandan a Italia. En 1971 le devuelven el cuerpo de Eva a Perón. Entonces, ¿dónde estaba Perón? En España. Se lo mandan ahora en un auto de Italia a España. Llega el cuerpo de Evita a manos de Perón y Perón dice, el cuerpo que me devolvieron le hace falta una falange del dedo, una parte de la oreja, tiene golpes en la nariz, en la frente, tiene los pies sucios, un montón de cosas que me dicen, ¿qué le pasó a este cuerpo? Lo reciben, lo restauran, lo tiene en España. ¿Cuándo vuelve ese cuerpo a la Argentina? Cuando en 1974 un grupo organizado decide venir al cementerio de la Recoleta a robarse el cuerpo del hombre que se había robado el cuerpo de esta. Tenemos este cuerpo para presionar al gobierno a traer a Eva. ¿Quién estaba en el gobierno? La tercera mujer de Perón. Eva fue la segunda. Yo no sé si esto lo sabían, pero Eva fue su segunda mujer. La tercera era la presidenta. Hasta que presionan a esta mujer para que traiga el cuerpo de la segunda mujer. La tercera trae a la segunda. Llega a Buenos Aires y la presidenta decide llevársela a la quinta donde vivía, que es la Quinta de Olivos. ¿Se acuerdan que hablamos de ella?
Ya.
En la Quinta de Olivos, esta presidenta tenía el cuerpo de Perón y el cuerpo de Evita. O sea que vivieron ahí, bueno, ella vivió ahí, pero hice los tres. No sé si les parece esto una locura, como yo vivo en una casa, en la capilla está mi ex esposo y la ex esposa de mi ex esposo. Tuvo 2 años ahí hasta que en el 76, o el golpe de Estado en la Argentina del 76, hace que la familia le envuelvan el cuerpo y la familia la sepulta acá. En un lugar donde ya sepultada una enorme cantidad de la sociedad que odiaba a Evita.
So, well, as you can see, the story of Evita is going to be fascinating. But like hers, there are going to be many other interesting stories in this cemetery. For example, there's a girl that's called Liliana Crociati, and she was a young woman who died on her honeymoon in an avalanche accident in Switzerland. When she came back, her husband built an exact replica for her room, but he also decided to add her dog sculpted at her feet because when she died, 2 days later, the dog died of sadness. So that's why they are together in this tomb. There's also going to be another famous tomb that was from Rufina Cambaceres. This was a 19-year-old girl who apparently died in 1902. But the night that she died, she was buried, and that night the caretaker heard some screamings coming out of her tomb. When they opened the coffin, they found that she had been scratching this tomb because she had been buried alive. And it was already too late when they found her. She had already died. But today, her mausoleum is going to show a sculpture of her trying to get out of the coffin, pushing the door. And this is going to be an image that you will not forget. And as you can see, it's going to have many, many, many stories of all of the different rich families that are buried in this cemetery. So, if you decide to listen to even more of the stories, I would recommend 100% taking a short tour. It's going to probably last around 1 hour, 2 hours. It's going to be cheap, but you're going to have a guide that will tell you all of these super interesting stories. And it's something that I would highly recommend so you can learn more about all of the legends around this cemetery of Recoleta. After visiting this, then I would recommend just walking through this incredible streets of Recoleta to see all of the palaces that were built by the aristocracy. And this is going to be where the story will become very interesting because you'll need to understand exactly how wealthy all of these Argentinians were and how obsessed they were with Paris. One example of this is going to be a woman called Mercedes Castellanos de Anchorena. She owned 330,000 hectares. And to give you an idea of how big this is, it's 13 times the size of the entire city of Buenos Aires. She had all of this space in La Pampa where she was growing a lot of agricultural things, only one single woman. And she was so rich that she decided to build an entire palace that is called Palacio San Martin. And it was built only for her and her 3 kids to live in. But in this enormous palace, she had 70 employees working there constantly. There were maids, cooks, gardeners, waiters, nannies, everything. The kitchens were in the upper floor so that the others wouldn't reach the main halls. There was a special elevator to bring the dishes down to the dining rooms. So this was like a huge palace. And today, this is going to act as the ceremonial headquarters of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and it's going to be the place basically where they'll receive all of these ambassadors or foreign dignitaries. But one cool thing is that you can visit this palace in two ways. First, there is going to be a very tiny cafe that will be called Croque Madame. And over here, you can have a coffee surrounded by this incredible architecture. The second option is trying to schedule a tour with the ministry, but these tours are not always available to the public. If you want, though, you have to check in advance and book it because since they're going to be limited, space is going to run out very fast. The most impressive street in Recoleta is going to be called Avenida Alvear, which is going to be like the Champs-Élysées of Buenos Aires. On a single block, you're going to find three enormous houses with different architectural styles. You can find one French, one neoclassical, and one late Victorian style. And all of these houses are going to have a depth of 100 meters, meaning that they occupied the entire block. So as you can see, this was the neighborhood of all of the rich people. Regarding these three huge palaces, one of them was donated to the Vatican, and it's now the Apostolic Nunciature, which is like the Vatican embassy in Argentina, and basically is where the Pope would stay if he visited Argentina. Then another became the Alvear Palace Hotel, which is the most luxurious hotel in Buenos Aires, and the third one is still a private house, although there are always rumors that it is abandoned today. Another impressive palace that you're going to find in this area is going to be Palacio Paz, which was built by José Paz, owner of the newspaper that's the most famous in Argentina called La Prensa. This palace is even bigger than the Anchorena families, and it's said that José Paz wanted to be president of Argentina, and so he built all of this palace because he believed that presidents should live in houses like this because it had the grandeur of their position. He never became a president, though, because he died before, but he left Buenos Aires with this incredible palace, and today this Palacio Paz is going to function as the military circle. Again, you can visit it with an occasional tour that they're offering, or you can go to the cafe that they have in the garden. If you don't have time for any of those two options, a fun fact is that Ricky Martin recorded the video for his song Frio Frio in the ballroom of this palace. So you can search for it on YouTube and you're going to see the inside of this palace in Ricky Martin's video. But besides all of these palaces and the cemetery, there are going to be other places that are worth visiting in the area of Recoleta and Retiro. The first one is going to be the National Museum of Fine Arts, which is going to be one of the most important art museums in Argentina. You're also going to find the Recoleta Cultural Center, which is going to be right next to the cemetery, and it always has some interesting exhibitions, many times of contemporary Argentine art. So it is worth visiting even if you just want to see the building because this was where the old convent of the Recoletos was. You'll also find the Floralis Generica, which is going to be a giant sculpture of a metal flower that it's going to be 23 meters high. It was designed to open with the sun and close at night, and although this mechanism doesn't always work, this is one of the most photographed spots in Buenos Aires. So this is your Instagram photo of Buenos Aires. And then finally, you'll also find the National Library if you like books, because this was designed by the famous Argentine architect Clorinda Testa and has a very particular shape that will lift the building on two enormous pillars that will leave an open space below. And the library has more than 2 million books that are open to the public. A fun fact is that this building was built on the land where the former presidential residence where Evita Perón died was. So as you see, there are lots of things to explore in these rich neighborhoods, and this is only the first day of the entire itinerary that I recommend in Buenos Aires. In my next episodes, I will continue exploring this beautiful city to discover other neighborhoods and other porteño customs that you cannot miss when you visit Buenos Aires. If you like this episode, please share it with a friend who loves to travel and give me a review because this will help me tremendously and it will motivate me to give you even more advice. Tell me in the comments which is the place that you want to visit the most, and I hope to see you next week to continue exploring the beautiful city of Buenos Aires. Enjoy your trip!